The air in the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom didn't smell like air. It smelled like old money, heavy perfume, and the mineral tang of ozone that precedes a lightning strike. 500 of the city's elite sat at tables draped in white silk, the fabric so thick it felt like cream under your fingertips. Crystal chandeliers, massive weeping willows of glass and light, hung from the gold-leafed ceiling, casting a fractured, shimmering glow over the assembly. I stood in the shadows of the service entrance, my back pressed against the cold velvet of the heavy curtains. I was wearing a black dress, simple, sharp, severe. It was the kind of dress designed to make you blend into the background, to make you a silhouette rather than a person. That was the point. For 32 years, that had always been the point. On the stage, bathed in a spotlight that seemed to love him, stood my father. Dr. Harrison Sterling, the titan of industry, the philanthropist, the man who could carve a face into perfection with a scalpel and charm a billionaire out of a fortune with a smile. He looked immaculate in his bespoke tuxedo, the satin lapels catching the light. In his hand, he held a crystal glass filled with a liquid the color of deep, bruised rubies. It was a 1,945 Domaine de la Romane Conti. At $15,000 a bottle, he was drinking a year's worth of a teacher's salary in a single sip. He raised the glass, his smile widening, showing teeth that were too white, too straight, too predatory. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, smooth as melted chocolate, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. He gestured vaguely toward the back of the room, toward the darkness where I stood. He didn't know exactly where I was, and he didn't care. To him, I was just a prop. "Meet my daughter," he said, a chuckle rumbling in his chest. A total waste of good genetics. The crowd laughed. It was a polite, conditioned ripple of amusement. They were trained to laugh when he made a joke, trained to applaud when he paused. They thought it was self-deprecating wit. They didn't know the venom that ran through his veins like ice water. He took a sip of the wine, savoring the humiliation he was serving alongside the vintage. She crawls around in filth, taking care of society's garbage instead of carrying on my legacy. A tragedy, really. But we all have our crosses to bear. 500 guests laughed harder this time. A few heads turned, scanning the back of the room, looking for the disappointment he was describing. They expected a mess. They expected someone unkempt, broken, perhaps weeping in a corner. They didn't know I had a wireless microphone receiver clipped to my belt, hidden under the structure of my dress. They didn't know that the sleek black clutch under my arm didn't contain lipstick or a compact, but a forensic audit that would turn this $150 million gala into a federal crime scene. Let them laugh, I thought, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Let them enjoy the show, because the curtain call is going to be a bloodbath. I checked my watch. 8:04 p.m. The federal agents were in position. The signal had been verified. I stepped out of the shadows. The transition from the darkness to the periphery of the light felt physical, like breaking the surface of water. I didn't scurry. I didn't hunch my shoulders. I walked with the metronomic precision of a soldier marching toward a tribunal. The sharp click-clack-click of my heels on the imported Italian marble floor cut through the lingering laughter like a knife through soft fruit. It was a distinct sound. Authoritative. Cold. Heads began to turn. The laughter sputtered and died, replaced by a confused murmur. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy and dangerous. The vacuum before an explosion. I walked straight up the center aisle. I kept my eyes locked on the stage. I could feel the gaze of 500 people sliding over me, judging the cut of my dress, the set of my jaw, the lack of jewelry. I was an alien organism invading their ecosystem of diamonds and ego. My father looked down at me as I approached the stairs. His eyes narrowed. He was expecting a tantrum. He was expecting a tearful plea for respect, a scene he could dismiss with a wave of his hand, and a witty remark about female hysteria. He expected the daughter he had bullied for 2.5 decades. He didn't get her. That girl died in a library 12 years ago. I walked up the stairs, the stage lights blindingly hot against my skin. I didn't stop until I was inside his personal space, close enough to smell the expensive cologne that failed to mask the scent of his arrogance. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was so stunned that he let it go. His fingers remained curled in the air for a fraction of a second, grasping at a ghost. His mouth opened, but the polished script in his head had no contingency for this. I turned to the crowd. 500 faces, illuminated by the ambient glow of the chandeliers, waiting for the punchline. "My father is right about one thing," I said. My voice was amplified, booming through the hall, steady and cold as a glacier. "I do work with the state's most vulnerable. I spend my days with the people you step over on your way to brunch. But—" I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was suffocating. I made eye contact with the governor, who was sitting at the center table. He left out my job title. I took a breath, centering myself. "I am the executive director for the National Health Oversight Trust. And I am the sole signatory with veto power over the $150 million grant Dr. Sterling has been begging for since January." The room didn't just go quiet. It froze. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the ballroom by a depressurization event. The clink of silverware stopped. The rustle of silk ceased. I turned slightly to look at my father. His face had gone from flushed arrogance to a sickly, ash gray in a single second. His eyes bulged. The glass of Domaine de la Romanée Conti slipped from his fingers. It hit the stage with a wet, shattering crash. The wine, $15,000 of fermented grapes, bled across the pristine white floor like a fresh wound. I didn't look at the mess. I shifted the microphone to my left hand and opened the thin black folder I had carried under my arm. "Let's talk about this proposal, shall we?" I asked, my voice conversational, deadly. "The Institute for Global Wellness. Sounds noble, sounds visionary." I flipped a page, the crisp sound of the paper amplified by the mic. "But I did a line item audit this morning. I looked directly at the wealthy donors in the front row, the tech moguls, the venture capitalists, the socialites. You were told your donations were going to build a sanctuary for the indigent. You were told this was about legacy." I looked down at the paper. 80% of the budget is allocated for facility upgrades. Specifically, imported Italian leather furniture for the executive offices and heated marble flooring for the private lobby. Not a single cent, not one penny is allocated for patient beds. A gasp rippled through the front row. My father made a sound, a strangled noise like a dying engine, but he couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the truth. I flipped another page. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Section 4. Administrative Transport. I looked at the crowd. Does a nonprofit serving the homeless require a tactical advantage? Because this budget allocates $1.5 million for the purchase of a private helicopter and 2 armored luxury SUVs. I turned to my father. He was trembling now. The glass shards crunched under his shoe as he took a stumbling step back. His mouth opened and closed, soundless. He looked like a fish on a dock, gasping, realizing the water was gone and the sun was burning him alive. "This isn't a medical facility," I said into the microphone, my voice dropping an octave, becoming hard as iron. "It's a retirement plan disguised as charity." I closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed like a gavel strike. "Dr. Sterling," I said, using his title like a curse word, "your application is formally rejected due to gross financial mismanagement and attempted fraud. You will never see a dime of federal funding as long as I hold a pen." I let the words hang there. I wanted them to soak into the walls. I wanted them to be etched into the memory of every person in that room. Then I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy, feedback-laced thud that made half the room flinch. I turned and walked off the stage. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the shock radiating off the crowd like heat from a blast furnace. For 32 years, I had been the invisible girl, the disappointment, the ghost in the hallway. But tonight, under the lights he paid for with money he didn't have, I was the only thing everyone could see. As I walked down the aisle, the silence began to fracture into whispers, then shouts. But my mind was drifting back. It was drifting back to the fire. 12 years ago. The mahogany library of his estate. The room smelled of old paper and brandy. I was 20 years old, holding an envelope with trembling hands. It was my acceptance letter to the Ivy League social work program, the top program in the country. It was my ticket out. He hadn't smiled. He hadn't congratulated me. He had snatched the letter from my hand, read it once with a sneer, and walked over to the fireplace. "You want to be a janitor for human refuse?" he had asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was bored. That was worse. "You want to waste my name on people who don't matter?" He tossed the letter onto the burning logs. I watched the paper curl, turn black, and dissolve into ash. "Go ahead," he said, dusting the ash off his hands as if he had touched something filthy. "But don't expect me to pay for you to ruin your life. You are dead to me the moment you walk out that door." He thought he had incinerated my future that night. He thought that by cutting me off, by refusing to speak my name for a decade, he had erased me. He was wrong. Fire doesn't just destroy things, it forges them. While he was building his empire of plastic surgery and vanity projects, I was working double shifts at a diner. I put myself through night school. I lived in a studio apartment that smelled of mildew and boiled cabbage. I ate ramen 5 nights a week and fueled myself on caffeine and pure, unadulterated spite. I earned my master's in public administration. I rose from a caseworker in the trenches to a district manager, and finally, to the national board. He never knew. He never asked. To him, I was just a ghost, a failure he occasionally used as a punchline to make himself feel superior. That blindness, that absolute narcissism was his fatal mistake. I looked back at him from the edge of the ballroom. He was gripping the podium, his knuckles white, staring at me like I was a stranger who had just broken into his house. He didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. He only saw the girl he had thrown away. The truth is, I saw his grant application land on my digital desk 6 months ago. I saw the inflated numbers immediately. I saw the shell companies listed as contractors, companies with addresses that led to empty lots in Delaware. I could have rejected it then. I could have sent a quiet, professional email denying the funds. It would have been efficient. It would have been easy, but it wouldn't have been justice. If I had rejected him quietly, he would have spun a story. He would have blamed bureaucracy, or politics, or bad luck. He would have found another donor to charm, another way to keep his house of cards standing. I needed to cut the head off the snake. So, I waited. I approved the preliminary rounds. I let him believe he had already won. I watched him book the Grand Plaza Hotel. I watched him order the lobster and the vintage wine. I waited until he had gathered every important person in the city, every witness he needed to validate his ego. I let him build his own courtroom, hire his own jury, and pay for his own execution. "You didn't just build a gala, Dad," I thought, looking into his terrified eyes across the room. "You built a trap, and you walked right into it." I pushed through the heavy service doors, leaving the chaos of the ballroom behind. The silence of the staff corridor was abrupt. The air was cold and smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and floor wax. I didn't run. I walked with the steady, measured pace of someone who had just finished a job. I just wanted to get to my car. I wanted the silence. I wanted to close the book on this long, ugly chapter of my life. But monsters don't just die because you cut off their food supply. Sometimes, when they are starving, they get dangerous. I heard the door slam open behind me. It wasn't a normal entrance. It was a collision. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The heavy, frantic breathing gave him away. "You stop right there." His voice echoed off the concrete walls, stripped of all its public polish. It was raw, ugly, and wet with rage. I stopped. I turned slowly. Dr. Sterling stood 10 feet away. The impeccable tuxedo was rumpled. His face was a mottled map of red fury and sweat. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar like distinct ropes. He didn't look like a brilliant surgeon anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. "You think you can walk away?" He lunged forward, closing the distance before I could step back. He grabbed my wrist. His fingers were strong surgeon's fingers, and they dug into my skin hard enough to bruise. "You think you can come into my house, in front of my peers, and humiliate me?" He spat. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his eyes. I didn't pull away. I didn't struggle. I just stared at him with absolute clinical detachment, as if he were a specimen in a jar. "Let go," I said. "Or what?" he hissed, leaning in close. I could smell the sour, stale scent of the wine on his breath. "You'll write another report? You'll tell on me, you ungrateful, treacherous little brat? I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me? By destroying my reputation." And there was the truth, naked and ugly. I watched him unravel, and suddenly, everything made sense. For years, I thought he hated my career because it didn't make money. I thought he despised my choices because they weren't prestigious enough. But looking at the sheer panic in his eyes, I realized I had been wrong. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the grant. It was about the hierarchy. In his mind, he was the Sunday and I was just a moon, meant to reflect his light or fade into the darkness. But tonight, the moon had eclipsed the Sunday. The waste of genetics had exercised power over the genius. The babysitter had fired the surgeon. It was a narcissistic injury so deep it was fracturing his reality. He wasn't angry because he was broke. He was angry because I had proven I was stronger than him. He couldn't process a world where his victim was his judge. "Your reputation?" I asked, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. "I didn't destroy your reputation, Dad. I just turned on the lights. If you don't like what people see, that's not my fault. You ruined everything yourself." He shook my arm, spit flying from his lips. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I know? I will bury you. I will make one phone call and you will never work in this state again. I will sue you for defamation until you're begging on the streets with the junkies you love so much." He wasn't hearing me. He was doubling down, retreating into the only thing he had left: threats. He thought he still held the cards. He thought he could bully reality back into a shape that pleased him. I wrenched my arm free with a sharp, violent jerk. He stumbled back, surprised by the physical resistance. "You're not listening," I said, stepping into his space, forcing him back against the wall. "You think this is over? You think I just came here to embarrass you?" He glared at me, panting, his eyes darting around the empty hallway. Then, a shift occurred. The panic in his eyes hardened into something sharper, something cruel. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. "But I have an insurance policy. You think you're smart? You think you can take my money? I still have something you care about." A cold knot formed in my stomach. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "You want to play the villain, Victoria? Fine. Let's see how much you love your grandmother when she's sleeping on a park bench tonight." He smiled, a wet, slick grin that made my skin crawl. He lowered the phone slowly, letting the threat hang in the air like smoke. He thought he had won. He thought he had found the one button he could press to make me heal. "You see," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you have your little title, Victoria. You have your clipboard and your self-righteousness. But I have the one thing that actually matters in this world." He stepped back, spreading his arms wide to gesture at the opulent hallway, at the memory of the ballroom behind us. "I have resources. I have power. You think rejecting one grant stops me? I have a black fund, darling, a rainy day reserve that you and your little bureaucrats can't touch." He laughed, and it was a jagged, ugly sound. He walked over to a service cart that had been abandoned in the hallway, grabbing a half-empty bottle of the Domaine de la Romane Conti that a waiter had left behind. He poured a splash into a water glass and swirled it. "Look at this wine. $15,000 a bottle. Look at the lobster tails on the buffet. Do you know who paid for all of this? The foundation. My foundation. I can write off a $2 million party as donor cultivation. I can fly to Paris on research trips. I live in a world where the rules are suggestions and money is the only law. You can't hurt me. I am the institution." He took a sip of the wine, his eyes locked on mine, daring me to challenge him. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again. I tapped the screen 3 times and turned it around so he could see. It wasn't a recording. It was a photo. A high-resolution image of the gala's catering invoice, the wine list, and the consulting fees paid to a shell company registered in his name. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through his arrogance like a scalpel. "You are the institution, and that is exactly why you're going to prison." He frowned, the glass halting halfway to his mouth. "What are you babbling about?" "It's called self-dealing," I said, "and under IRS Code 4941, it is strictly prohibited for a private foundation manager to use charitable assets for personal benefit. No luxury dinners, no vintage wine, and certainly no donor cultivation parties that function as ego-stroking for the chairman." I swiped to the next photo, a screenshot of the federal statute. "You just boasted, actually, that you used foundation money to pay for this night. That isn't a loophole, Dad. That's tax fraud. It's embezzlement. And when you combine it with the inflated construction contracts I found in your grant proposal, it's a RICO case." The color drained from his face so fast it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. He lowered the glass, his hand shaking so hard the wine sloshed over the rim, staining his white cuff red. "I took photos of the menu," I continued, relentless. "I took photos of the wine bottles. I have the invoices. And 30 seconds ago, while you were bragging about your black fund, I uploaded all of it to a secure server shared with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division." "You wouldn't," he stammered. "I already did. This isn't a party anymore, Dad. It's a crime scene, and you just gave me the confession." He stared at the phone like it was a weapon. The swagger vanished. The king of surgery was gone. All that remained was a greedy old man, terrified of consequences. "You traitor," he whispered. "No," I said. "You committed the crime. I just turned on the lights." Panic twisted into rage. Instead of surrendering, he grabbed his own phone and hovered over a contact. "Delete the photos," he snarled, "or I stop paying for your grandmother's nursing home right now. Tonight, they'll roll her bed onto the street. I swear to God, Victoria, I will kill her to hurt you." He flashed the screen. It was the contact for the administrator at Oakhaven, a rotting facility he had shoved her into to save money. I didn't flinch. "Call them," I said. "Speakerphone." He looked confused by my lack of fear, but his desperation drove him. He dialed. The line rang once, twice, then a tone. "We're sorry. The number you have reached is disconnected." He stared at the phone. "What?" "She's not there," I told him. My voice was soft, almost gentle. "I moved her last Tuesday." His head snapped up. "I moved her to the Vanderbilt," I said. "Assisted living, private suite, garden view. 1 year paid up front." His face collapsed. The story he'd invented about me, that I was broke, naive, beneath him disintegrated in that moment. "You never saw me," I said. "You were too busy admiring your own reflection. I earned my degrees. I managed budgets bigger than your entire hospital system. I saved half my salary for 5 years just for this moment. You assumed I was weak because I refused to worship you." He slid to the floor, his back sliding down the concrete wall. The fight left him. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Victoria, I have money hidden. We can make a deal." I turned my phone screen to him one last time. It showed an active call. "Call in progress. Special Agent Thorne. Federal Criminal Investigation." "He's been listening for the last 3 minutes," I said. The phone dropped from my father's hand. It clattered onto the floor, landing next to the broken glass. The fight was over. I turned and walked out through the service hallway. As I pushed the exterior doors open, I heard shouting behind me. Then sirens. Then the small, panicked voice of a man who finally understood the concept of gravity. Outside, the night air smelled like rain and exhaust. It was beautiful. I walked to my modest sedan parked in the employee lot. I got in, closed the door, and the silence wrapped around me like a warm blanket. My hands were shaking, just a little. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I dialed my grandmother. "It's done," I said when she answered. "And him?" she whispered. "He can't hurt us anymore," I said. "He's gone." For the first time in my life, The noise in my head, his voice, his judgment, his looming shadow was gone. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was more like the ache after cutting out a tumor. It hurt, but it was a healing hurt. As I drove away from the Grand Plaza Hotel, watching the flashing lights of the federal vehicles swarm the entrance in my rearview mirror, I didn't look back. People like him think power makes them untouchable. They think wealth is a shield. But truth always lands eventually. It falls like rain, eroding even the tallest mountains. Someone is treating you like you're invisible. Let them. Ghosts walk through walls. Ghosts see everything. And by the time they notice you, the checkmate is already set. Sometimes, being overlooked is your greatest advantage.